I stared at the eviction notice in my trembling hands, the words blurring through my tears. 7 days to vacate the premises. 7 days to leave the Victorian craftsman I'd lovingly restored with my own hands. 7 days to abandon the only home I'd known for 15 years. It had to be a mistake. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Bennett, but the paperwork is in order." The sheriff's deputy shifted uncomfortably on my front porch. "The property was sold 3 weeks ago. The new owners are within their rights." "That's impossible," I whispered, clutching the doorframe for support. "I own this house. I inherited it from my grandmother. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The deputy's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "Ma'am, according to county records, your husband, Daniel Bennett, sold this property to Westlake Development on February 12th. His signature is on all the documents. My husband, Daniel. The man who'd been on a business trip for the past month. The man who hadn't been answering my calls for the past week. The man who had apparently sold my family home right out from under me. There has to be some mistake," I repeated, but even as the words left my mouth, the horrible truth was crystallizing in my mind. "You might want to contact a lawyer," the deputy suggested, handing me the formal notice. "Best of luck, Mrs. Bennett." I closed the door and slid down against it until I was sitting on the hardwood floors I'd sanded and refinished myself. My grandmother's house, the house where I'd grown up, the house I'd inherited before I even met Daniel, had been sold without my knowledge or consent. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Daniel. Sorry, Elle. It's complicated. I'll explain everything when I get back. Promise." I hurled the phone across the room, watching with grim satisfaction as it shattered against the brick fireplace. 10 years of marriage, and this was what it had come to: a text message and an eviction notice. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 15 minutes later, I was in my car, hands still shaking as I drove to Bennett & Associates, the real estate law firm where my husband was a senior partner. If Daniel thought he could sell my house and disappear, he had seriously underestimated the woman he married. The receptionist at Bennett & Associates greeted me with her usual plastic smile. "Mrs. Bennett, Daniel isn't in today. Would you like to leave a message?" "No need, Megan. I'll just wait in his office." My voice came out, eerily calm, belying the storm raging inside me. "I'm afraid I can't." "Yes, you can." I moved past her desk toward the hallway leading to the partners' offices. "And please don't call security. That would be embarrassing for everyone." I knew Daniel's firm inside and out. I'd helped him build it, after all. In the early days, when he was just starting out, I'd been the one organizing client files until 3 a.m., planning networking events, even cleaning the office when they couldn't afford janitorial services. Bennett & Associates existed, in no small part, because of my unpaid labor. Daniel's office was pristine, the desk clear of any personal items, unusual for a man who normally surrounded himself with framed photos and mementos. I sat in his leather chair and began methodically going through his drawers. Empty, computer gone. It was as if he'd cleared out. L. Richard Morrison, Daniel's oldest friend and the firm's co-founder, stood in the doorway. "I was hoping you'd come by." "Where is he, Rich?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Richard closed the door behind him and sank into one of the client chairs. He looked exhausted, his normally impeccable appearance rumpled, dark circles highlighting bloodshot eyes. "Honestly? I don't know. He cleaned out his desk last Friday, said he needed some personal time." Richard rubbed his face. "What's going on, Elle? Half the partners are in panic mode. Daniel transferred his client files to associates, cleared his schedule through April. He sold my house. I said flatly. Richard's head snapped up. What? My grandmother's house, the one I owned, before we were married. He somehow sold it 3 weeks ago without my knowledge. I just got served with eviction papers. That's not possible, Richard frowned. That property was in your name only. I know because I handled the paperwork when you inherited it. A humorless laugh escaped me. Well, apparently it was possible because it happened. Westlake Development now owns my home, and I have 7 days to get out. I swear I knew nothing about this. Richard leaned forward, his expression earnest. But I'm going to help you figure it out. Let me make some calls. I wanted to believe him. Richard had been in our lives forever. Best man at our wedding, godfather to our son, Jake. But right now, I couldn't trust anyone connected to Daniel. Thanks, but I'll handle it myself. I stood, smoothing down my skirt. Just tell him when you talk to him that I know, and I'm coming for everything. Wait, Richard started, but I was already walking out, head held high despite the curious stares from associates and paralegals. Back in my car, I finally allowed myself a moment of complete breakdown. Sobs racked my body as I gripped the steering wheel, the reality of my situation crashing down. Not only had my husband betrayed me in the most fundamental way, but he'd also made me homeless. And Jake, our 19-year-old son away at college, how would I explain this to him? After 10 minutes of unrestrained tears, I wiped my face, reapplied my lipstick, and called the one person I knew could help me make sense of this nightmare. Margaret Chen answered on the second ring. Is everything okay? My best friend since law school had a sixth sense for trouble. No, I said simply. Can I come over? It's important. I'll open the wine. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in Margaret's kitchen, a glass of Cabernet, untouched before me as I recounted the day's events. As the county's most formidable district attorney, Margaret listened with the focused attention she usually reserved for building cases against organized crime. That son of a bitch, she muttered, when I finished. This is fraud, clear-cut forgery. He must have faked your signature on the deed transfer. But how? The county recorder would verify signatures, wouldn't they? Margaret's expression darkened. You'd be surprised how easy it is to push paperwork through with the right connections. Daniel knows every real estate clerk in the county. So what do? First, we file a police report for fraud. Then we get a temporary restraining order against Westlake Development to stop the eviction. And then, she smiled grimly, we destroy Daniel Bennett so thoroughly that he'll wish he'd never been born. For the first time since seeing that eviction, notice, I felt a flicker of hope. Margaret wasn't just my friend. She was a legal bulldozer with a perfect conviction record and contacts throughout the justice system. You really think we can fight this? Margaret set down her wine glass. I know Daniel thinks he's clever, but he just committed multiple felonies. Forging signatures? Wire fraud? Not to mention the ethical violations that will get him disbarred. He's going down. The question is, how hard do you want to hit him? I thought about the 15 years I'd spent in that house, the garden I'd planted, the nursery I'd painted for Jake when I was 8 months pregnant, the kitchen I'd remodeled myself while working full-time as a high school English teacher. Thought about Daniel, who had always seen my house as a liability. Too old, too maintenance-heavy, not prestigious enough for a rising star attorney. I want to hit him with everything, I said, my voice steady now. I want my house back, and I want him to lose everything the way he tried to make me lose everything. Margaret nodded approvingly. That's my girl. Now let's get started. First, call is to Sarah Jimenez at the Fraud Division. Second is to Judge Winters. She owes me a favor and can expedite that TRO. As Margaret began making calls, I excused myself to use the bathroom. Standing before the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My chestnut hair was disheveled, my eyes puffy from crying, my complexion pale with shock. But behind the distress, I saw something else emerging. determination, rage, purpose. Daniel had always underestimated me. He saw me as the supportive wife, the high school teacher who didn't understand real business. He'd forgotten that before I became Mrs. Bennett, I had been Eleanor Caldwell, summa cum laude graduate of Stanford Law, who chose teaching over practicing because I wanted to make a difference in young lives. He'd forgotten that I was my grandmother's granddaughter, a woman who had survived the Depression, built a business from nothing, and taught me that when someone tries to take what's yours, you don't just fight back. You fight to win. I splashed cold water on my face and rejoined Margaret, who was now speaking with someone from the county recorder's office. Yes, I understand it's irregular, but this is a potential case of massive fraud, she was saying. We need to see those documents today. After another minute of back and forth, she hung up with a satisfied smile. We have an appointment at 4 p.m. They're pulling the deed transfer documents. That was fast, I remarked. When the DA calls about fraud, people tend to make time, Margaret shrugged. Now, while we wait, let's talk strategy. Have you checked your bank accounts? Credit cards? If he's bold enough to sell your house, he might have raided your finances? 2. My stomach dropped. I hadn't even thought to check our accounts. Daniel had always handled the finances. Another way I'd abdicated power without realizing it. Hands trembling slightly, I used Margaret's laptop to log into our joint checking account. The balance read $342.17. Last I'd checked, there had been over $30,000, our emergency fund. The savings account was completely empty. He cleaned us out, I whispered, scrolling through transaction after transaction. Large withdrawals over the past month, all in increments just under $10,000. Structuring, Margaret observed grimly. He's keeping the withdrawals under the reporting threshold. More evidence of premeditation. I checked our investment accounts next. All emptied. Even Jake's college fund, the account we'd been building since his birth to ensure his education, showed a zero balance. He took everything, I said, my voice hollow. Even our son's future. Margaret placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. Document it all. Take screenshots. Print statements. We're building a case, Elle, and it's getting stronger by the minute. By 4 p.m., we were seated across from Darlene Williams, a harried-looking county clerk who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. These are the documents filed 3 weeks ago, she said, sliding a folder across her desk. Deed transfer from Eleanor and Daniel Bennett to Westlake Development. Sale price, $750,000. I gasped. The property was worth at least twice that in the current market. Daniel had practically given away my family home. I need to see the signatures, Margaret demanded. Darlene flipped to the last page. There it was. My name, signed with a flourish that looked remarkably like my handwriting, but it wasn't mine. That's not my signature, I said immediately. It certainly looks like the signature on your driver's license, Darlene countered defensively. Because it was forged by someone who had access to my identification, I shot back. I never signed this document. I never even knew about it until today when I was served with eviction papers. Margaret leaned forward. Ms. Williams, we need copies of everything related to this transaction. And we need to know who processed this paperwork. Darlene hesitated. Unless you'd prefer to explain to a grand jury why you're obstructing a fraud. Investigation? Margaret added pleasantly. 20 minutes later, we left the county office with a complete copy of the file and a crucial piece of information. The document had been processed by Linda Martinez, a clerk who had worked with Daniel on numerous real estate transactions over the years. Next stop, the bank where this money was deposited, Margaret said as we walked to her car. We need to find out where that $750,000 went. Do you think Daniel kept the money? I asked. Margaret gave me a sidelong glance. Honestly, I think he's running. The emptied accounts, the disappearance, the rushed sale of your house, classic flight preparation. The question is Who is he running from? That question haunted me as we drove to First National Bank, where Daniel and I had done our banking. For years. Margaret's DA credentials got us an immediate meeting with the branch manager, who confirmed my worst fears. The funds from the Westlake development transaction were wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, he explained, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Bennett came in personally to arrange it, said it was for a real estate investment opportunity. And no one thought that was suspicious, Margaret pressed. The manager shifted in his seat. Mr. Bennett is a valued customer and a well-respected attorney. We had no reason to question his instructions, particularly since both signatures were on the authorization. Both signatures, I repeated dully. Daniel hadn't just forged my name on the house deed. He'd been systematically forging my signature for who knows how long. As we left the bank, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Elle? Daniel's voice sent a shockwave through me. Don't hang up, please. I put the phone on speaker so Margaret could hear. Where are you? I demanded. I can't tell you that. He sounded tired, stressed. But I need you to listen. You're in danger. They might come for you to get to me. The only person who's endangered me is you. I spat. You sold my house. You emptied our accounts. You stole our son's college fund. I had no choice, Daniel's voice cracked. They were going to kill me, Elle. I owe them money, a lot of money, gambling debts. I tried to win it back, but it just got worse. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Gambling? Daniel? How much? I asked, my voice barely audible. 2 million, give or take. He paused. Look, I'm sorry about the house, I really am. But I needed cash fast, and it was the only asset we could liquidate quickly. The only asset I could liquidate, you mean, I corrected coldly. That was my house, Daniel. Mine, not yours to sell. I know, and I'll make it right, I swear. I just need time to what? Run farther? Hide better? There are people being evicted from my house in 6 days because of what you did. Elle, please, he begged. Just lay low. Don't go to the police. These people are dangerous. They have connections everywhere. Just wait until I figure this out. Margaret, who had been silently listening, suddenly spoke. Daniel, this is Margaret. Chen. You should know that we've already documented the fraud, identified where the money went, and are preparing to file criminal charges. The DA's office will be issuing a warrant for your arrest by morning. Silence then. Maggie, you don't understand. This isn't some white-collar crime situation. These are dangerous people. Save it for your arraignment, Margaret cut him off. And just so you know, Elle will be staying with me until we sort this out. If these dangerous people exist outside your imagination, they can deal with the armed security at my building. I could hear Daniel's panicked breathing. Elle, don't do this. Please, I'm begging you. Give me 2 weeks to fix this. I thought about the eviction notice, about our emptied bank accounts, about Jake's stolen college fund, about 15 years of memories in a house that was no longer mine. You had 10 years to be honest with me, I said quietly. Now you have however long it takes for the police to find you. Goodbye, Daniel. I hung up and blocked the number, then turned to Margaret with resolute determination. I want to file that police report now, I said. And then I want to call my son before he hears about this from someone else. Margaret nodded approvingly. And after that, we go nuclear on Daniel Bennett's entire life. As we drove to the police station, I found myself strangely calm. The shock and grief were still there, but they had crystallized into something harder, more focused. Daniel had betrayed me, stolen from me, and left me to face the consequences alone. He thought he could run away from the mess he'd created. He thought I would cower in fear, paralyzed by the destruction of the life I'd built. He was wrong. I am Eleanor Caldwell Bennett, and if my husband wants war, then war is exactly what he's going to get. The Westlake Development Office was housed in a sleek downtown high-rise, all glass and chrome and self-importance. I smoothed down my most professional blazer, borrowed from Margaret as all my clothes were still in the house I no longer legally owned, and approached the receptionist with Margaret at my side. I need to speak with whoever handled the purchase. Of 1452 Maple Avenue, I said firmly. Do you have an appointment? The young woman asked without looking up from her computer. Margaret placed her DA business card on the desk. This is our appointment. The receptionist's eyes widened as she read the card. 1 moment, please. 5 minutes later, we were seated across from Bradley Westlake himself, the 40-something heir to his father's real estate empire, known throughout the city for buying historic properties and replacing them with luxury condominiums. Mrs. Bennett, he began, his smile not reaching his eyes. This is an unexpected pleasure. Though I must say, we've already begun demolition planning for your former property. My property, I corrected. The sale was fraudulent. My signature was forged by my husband, who had no legal right to sell the house. Bradley's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. That's a serious allegation. However, our legal team thoroughly vetted the transaction. All paperwork was in order. Was it? Margaret interjected. Because we've just come from filing a police report for fraud. The detective found it very interesting that Westlake Development paid roughly half the market value for a historic property. Almost as if you knew something was irregular about the sale. The developer's face hardened. Are you accusing me of something, Ms. Chen? Not yet, Margaret replied pleasantly. But we will be deposing everyone involved in this transaction as part of the criminal investigation. I'm sure your investors will be thrilled with the publicity. Bradley leaned back in his chair, assessing us coolly. What exactly do you want? Want my house back, I said simply. He laughed. That's not going to happen. We've already invested in demolition permits, architectural plans. For a property you acquired through fraud, Margaret interrupted, which makes you potentially complicit. Best case scenario, you're looking at months of litigation and negative press. Worst case, criminal charges for receiving stolen property. Bradley's jaw tightened. You're bluffing. Margaret smiled the smile I'd seen her use in courthouse corridors, the one that made hardened criminals suddenly eager to accept plea deals. Try me. I've got a grand jury that loves to indict wealthy developers, especially ones with fathers, running for city council. That hit a nerve. Westlake Sr.'s political ambitions were well known, as was his obsessive concern with the family's public image. Bradley steepled his fingers, considering his options. Even if, and this is strictly hypothetical, we were open to unwinding this transaction, there would be costs involved, significant costs, which would pale in comparison to the costs of fighting criminal charges and civil suits simultaneously, I pointed out. Not to mention the value of the goodwill you'd generate by returning a family home to its rightful owner after discovering your company was unwittingly involved in fraud. Bradley's eyes narrowed. You've thought this through. I've had a crash course in fighting back, I replied evenly. So what's it going to be, Mr. Westlake? A simple deed transfer returning my property, or a very public, very messy legal battle that could last years? After a tense silence, Bradley reached for his phone. Carolyn, call legal. Tell them we need to discuss unwinding the Maple Avenue acquisition due to potential title issues. He paused, then added, and get my father on the line. As he hung up, he fixed us with a hard stare. I'll need documentation of this alleged fraud. Margaret slid a folder across the desk. Police report, forensic signature analysis, bank records showing the money trail, statement from the county clerk who processed the paperwork. Bradley flipped through the documents, his expression souring with each page. You've been busy. You have no idea, I assured him. 2 hours later, we left Westlake Development with a signed agreement, in exchange for returning my house and waiving any claims against them. They would avoid being named in any criminal or civil proceedings related to Daniel's fraud. The property would be back in my name within 48 hours. That was surprisingly easy, I remarked as we walked to Margaret's car. Not really, Margaret replied. Bradley Westlake is many things, but stupid isn't one of them. He recognized a losing battle when he saw one. She paused. Have you thought about what comes next, after you get the house back? I had been thinking of little else. I'm going to find Daniel, not just for me, but for Jake. My son had taken the news about his father with shocked disbelief, followed by quiet rage. The betrayal of his college fund had hit him particularly hard. And when you find him? I'm going to make sure he loses everything, I said quietly. The way he tried to make me lose everything. Margaret nodded, understanding in her eyes. We should start with the gambling. If Daniel really owes dangerous people $2 million, that trail might lead us to him. Or to whoever he's running. From, I added. As if on cue, my phone rang, another unknown number. With Margaret watching, I answered and put it on speaker. Eleanor Bennett? A man's voice, deep and unfamiliar. Yes. Who's this? Someone your husband owes a great deal of money to. I believe he mentioned our existence during your last conversation. A chill ran through me, so Daniel hadn't been lying about that part. I don't know where he is, I said automatically. I'm aware, but you might be motivated to help find him considering the situation. And what situation is that? The man's voice remained eerily calm. Your husband borrowed $2 million from my associates. He then lost that money making increasingly desperate bets. When pressed for repayment, he sold your house, which I understand was inadequate to cover his debt. Now he's disappeared, leaving you to deal with the consequences. If you're looking for sympathy, you borrowed money from the wrong man's wife, I replied coldly, a soft chuckle. I'm not looking for sympathy, Mrs. Bennett. I'm offering an opportunity. You see, I have certain legal difficulties that could benefit from the expertise of a well-connected district attorney, like your friend Ms. Chen. Beside me, Margaret stiffened. I'm hanging up now, I said. Before you do, the man continued, you should know that I'm willing to forgive Daniel's debt entirely in exchange for a small consideration from Ms. Chen, a case she's currently prosecuting. One missing evidence file could make a significant difference, Margaret silently mouthed. Keep him talking, while pulling out her own phone. What case? I asked. The Delgado matter. I believe Ms. Chen is familiar with it. Margaret's eyes widened, in recognition before she began typing rapidly on her phone. And if we refuse? I asked. Then I'm afraid your husband's debt becomes yours. After all, you were married when he took the loan. Community property state and all that. That's not how it works, I snapped. In legal courts, perhaps. But we operate under different rules. The man paused. Think about it, Mrs. Bennett. Your debt, or should I say, your husband's debt, could be wiped clean. All it takes is one missing file. I'll be in touch for your answer. The line went dead. The Delgado case? I turned to Margaret. Her expression was grim. Major drug trafficking indictment. We're going after one of the biggest suppliers in the state. If they're trying to derail that prosecution... She trailed off, her implication clear. Daniel had borrowed money from organized crime. What do we do now? I asked, suddenly feeling the weight of the situation. This was no longer just about a fraudulent house sale. This was dangerous territory. Margaret finished typing on her phone and hit send. Now we let the FBI know that someone just tried to obstruct justice by threatening a district attorney, and we get you somewhere safe while they trace that call. I'm not hiding, I said firmly. If these people found me once, they can find me again. The only solution is to find Daniel first and make him fix the mess he created. And how exactly? Do you plan to do that? Margaret asked. I thought about my husband, the man I'd spent a decade with, the father of my child, the partner I thought I knew inside and out. Where would he run? Where would he hide? I need to get into his office. Again, I said suddenly. His real office. Not just the one at the firm. The home office where he kept his personal files. L, your house, is still technically owned by Westlake Development for the next 48 hours, I finished. But I bet the locks haven't been changed yet. Margaret looked uncertain. This is a bad idea. If those people are watching your house, then they'll see me going home where I belong, I said with determination. Besides, what better place to hide than the one place everyone thinks I've been evicted from? Margaret sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of my jaw. Fine, but I'm coming with you, and we're bringing backup. Backup? She held up her phone. I just texted my brother, former Special Forces, current private security consultant. He'll meet us there. As we drove toward Maple Avenue, toward the house I'd thought I'd lost forever, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Daniel had tried to take everything from me. My home, my savings, my security, our son's future. In doing so, he'd unleashed something he'd never seen before, the Eleanor who fought back. Night had fallen by the time we pulled up to my Victorian Craftsman. The porch light I always left on was dark, making the house look abandoned and forlorn. A figure detached itself from the shadows of the large oak tree in the front yard. Margaret's brother, Michael Chen, built like a linebacker and moving with military precision. Place looks clear, he reported quietly after introductions. No signs of surveillance, no unusual vehicles in the area, but that doesn't mean we're not being watched. Let's be quick then, I said, fishing my house key from my purse and praying it still worked. It did. The door swung open on familiar creaking hinges, revealing the darkened hallway beyond. Home. My home. The relief I felt was almost dizzying. Michael insisted on entering first, checking each room with professional thoroughness while Margaret and I waited in the foyer. All clear, he eventually called from upstairs. I moved through the house like a woman in a dream, noting with relief that nothing had been disturbed yet. My photographs still lined the mantelpiece. The quilt my grandmother had made still draped over the back of the sofa. The copper pot still hung from the rack in the kitchen. Westlake hadn't yet begun the process of emptying the property. Daniel's office? Margaret prompted gently. I led them to the converted sunroom at the back of the house that had served as my husband's home workspace. Unlike the rest of the house, this room showed signs of recent disturbance. Drawers left slightly. Open, empty spaces on bookshelves where volumes had been removed. The computer gone from the desk. He cleaned out the important stuff, I observed, disappointment washing through me. Just like at the firm. Maybe, Michael said, already examining the room with expert eyes. But people in a hurry make mistakes. They forget things. He was right. A methodical search revealed a hidden wall safe behind a framed law degree. Empty, but with a single sheet of paper left behind, apparently dropped in haste. It was a bank statement from an institution I didn't recognize. Grand Cayman National. Margaret read over my shoulder. Looks like we found where some of that money went. Next, we discovered a burner phone charger plugged into an outlet behind the desk. And finally, the jackpot. A small notebook tucked into the hollow center of a fake law book on the shelf. The notebook contained what appeared to be gambling records. Dates, amounts, cryptic notations like SD at Palace or BJ at Riverfront. Interspersed were names and initials, including RM on multiple pages. RM, I repeated, a suspicion forming. Richard Morrison? Daniel's partner? Could be, Margaret agreed. What's the connection? I flipped through more pages, stopping at a recent entry that made my blood run cold. RM vouched, AL loan approved. 2M. Below that, a single word. Delgado. The pieces began to align in my mind. Richard introduced Daniel to these people, I realized. He vouched for him with whoever AL is. Alonso Delgado, Margaret said grimly. The drug trafficker we're prosecuting. The one they want me to sabotage the case against. Michael, who had been methodically photographing everything we found, looked up sharply. If that's true, your husband's partner is connected to a major drug cartel. This just got a lot more complicated. I sank into Daniel's desk chair, the implications washing over me. My husband hadn't just gambled away our finances and sold my house. He'd gotten involved with a drug cartel, likely through his oldest friend and business partner. "We need to take this to the FBI," Margaret said. "Tonight." I nodded numbly, but my mind was already racing ahead. If Richard was the connection between Daniel and these criminals, then Richard would know where Daniel might have run to, and if I wanted to find my husband before either the cartel or the FBI did, I needed to get that information from Richard, without alerting him to what I knew. As we carefully replaced everything except the notebook and the bank statement, which Margaret secured as evidence, I began formulating a plan. "Michael, how long can you stay in town?" I asked. "As long as you need," he replied without hesitation. "Maggie already briefed me on the situation." "Good, because tomorrow I'm going to have a very interesting conversation with Richard Morrison. And then I'm going to find my husband and make him pay for what he's done, to me, to our son, and to our life." As we left the house, my house, I took one last look around. For 15 years, these walls had witnessed my life's journey: marriage, motherhood, career changes, happiness, and now betrayal. Soon, they would witness something else: my complete and utter refusal to be a victim. Daniel Bennett thought he could sell my house, steal my money, and disappear into the night. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. Morning light filtered through the guest room blinds in Margaret's downtown apartment as I stared at the ceiling, strategizing. Sleep had been elusive, my mind racing with revelations and half-formed plans. I'd spent most of the night researching offshore banking, Cayman Islands extradition laws, and the Delgado cartel, piecing together the world Daniel had secretly inhabited. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Called Dad again. Still straight to voicemail. Coming home this weekend. I sat up immediately, typing back. "No. Stay at school. Midterms are coming up. I'm handling everything. The last thing I needed was my son getting caught in this dangerous mess." Jake was safe at Northwestern, 3 states away from whatever storm was about to break. "Mom, someone sold our house. I'm coming home." I sighed. Jake had inherited my stubbornness and Daniel's protective instincts, a combination that made him impossible to dissuade once his mind was set. "Fine, but you're staying with Aunt Margaret. I'll explain everything when you get here." Margaret appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her court attire, a steaming mug of coffee in each hand. "You're meeting Richard at 10? I nodded, accepting the offered caffeine. "At Westfield Park, public enough to be safe, private enough to talk." "Michael will be nearby, but not visible," she assured me, referring to her brother who had taken my security as his personal mission. "And I've briefed my FBI contact. They're opening a formal investigation, but they're giving us a little room to run with this." "By us, you mean me," I clarified. "They're letting me try to smoke out Daniel." Margaret's expression turned serious. "Only because you're already involved and potentially at risk. But Elle, these are dangerous people. If Daniel really owes them $2 million, then I need to find him before they do," I finished. "Or before he gets even deeper," Margaret added. "Have you considered that Daniel might still be gambling, trying to win back what he's lost?" The thought had crossed my mind during the night. Daniel had always been proud, competitive, unable to accept defeat. If he was still clinging to the gambler's fallacy that the next bet would fix everything. "All the more reason to move quickly," I said, rising from the bed. "What time is your meeting with the FBI?" "Noon. I'm bringing the notebook and offshore account information." Margaret hesitated. "Elle, you need to prepare yourself. Best case scenario, Daniel goes to federal prison for a long time. Worst case?" She didn't need to finish the thought. If the cartel found Daniel before law enforcement did, prison would be the least of his worries. I pushed that image away. Despite everything, Daniel was still Jake's father, still the man I had loved for a decade, still human. One problem at a time, I said firmly. First, Richard. 2 hours later, I sat on a bench in Westfield Park, watching mothers with strollers navigate the walking paths and elderly couples feed the ducks by the small pond. Normal people living normal lives, untouched by offshore accounts and cartel threats. Richard Morrison arrived precisely at 10, his usual tailored suit replaced by casual weekend wear, polo shirt, khakis, the uniform of a man trying very hard to look relaxed. "Elle," he greeted me with an awkward side hug. How are you holding up?" "As well as can be expected," I replied neutrally. "Thanks for meeting me." Richard settled beside me on the bench, maintaining a careful distance. "Any news about the house situation?" "Actually, yes. Westlake Development is reversing the sale." I watched his face carefully as I added, "Once I proved Daniel had forged my signature." A flicker of something, alarm, crossed his features before he schooled his expression. Wow, that's a relief. I'm glad they're doing the right thing." "Are you?" I tilted my head. "Because someone must have notarized those forged documents, Rich. Someone with legal credentials who knew Daniel well enough to help him pull this off." Richard's posture stiffened. "Elle, I swear to you, I had no involvement in selling your house. I would never—" "But you knew about Daniel's gambling, didn't you?" I interrupted quietly. "You knew he was in trouble." His eyes darted away, focusing on a distant jogger. "I suspected he had some financial issues. He'd been borrowing from the firm's operational account. As managing partner, I noticed the irregularities." "And did you also suspect who he was? Borrowing from outside the firm? Who you introduced him to?" Richard's head snapped toward me, genuine fear flashing across his face. "What are you talking about?" "Alonzo Delgado," I said evenly. "The man whose case Margaret is prosecuting. The man who wants her to lose evidence in exchange for forgiving Daniel's debt." All color drained from Richard's face. "Elle, you need to stop asking these questions. For your own safety." "Too late for that," I countered. "These people already approached me. They think I might be useful in pressuring Margaret." "Jesus Christ," Richard muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Ella, you have no idea what you're dealing with." "Then enlighten me," I challenged. "Because my options are pretty limited right now. I can work with the FBI, who are opening an investigation as we speak. Or I can find Daniel myself and get him to fix this mess before anyone else gets hurt." At the mention of the FBI, Richard looked like he might be sick. "They're investigating? Already? What did you expect? Daniel committed multiple felonies, stole $2 million, and disappeared. Did you think no one would notice?" Richard stood abruptly, pacing a few steps away before turning back. "Elle, listen to me very carefully. You need to drop this. Take Jake and go somewhere, anywhere, for a while. Let this blow over." "Blow over?" I echoed incredulously. "This isn't a minor scandal, Rich. This is fraud, theft, and involvement with a drug cartel. It doesn't just blow over." "You don't understand," Richard insisted, lowering his voice. "Delgado isn't just some thug. He's connected to people in government, in law enforcement. Even if the FBI opens an investigation, it might go nowhere." "The more reason for me to find Daniel first," I said stubbornly. "Where is he, Rich?" Richard glanced around nervously before sitting back down. "I honestly don't know. After he cleared out his office, he called me from a burner phone. Said he needed to disappear for a while, make arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" I pressed. He didn't specify. Richard hesitated, then added, "But he asked if I still had the key to the lake house." My pulse quickened. Your family's property in Michigan? Richard nodded reluctantly. My parents' old place. We used to go there for fishing weekends, remember? Before they sold it to that developer. I remembered. Daniel and Richard had spent countless summer weekends at that lake house during the early years of our marriage. But the property had been sold years ago when Richard's parents retired to Florida. The developer went bankrupt, Richard continued quietly. The place has been sitting empty. I kept a key because, well, sometimes I still go up there to clear my head. Daniel knows about it. You think he's hiding there? Richard shrugged helplessly. It's possible. It's remote, fully furnished, and no one would think to look for him there since it's not publicly connected to either of us anymore. It was the first real lead I'd had. A place Daniel might be hiding where I might finally get answers. I need that key, Rich. He shook his head firmly. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. If Delgado's people are watching you, they're watching me at my house, which I'm not currently occupying, I pointed out. No one would connect me to an abandoned lake house in Michigan. Please. Rich, I cut him off. Daniel stole my house, emptied my bank accounts, and left me to deal with the fallout. I have a right to confront him. And what if Delgado's people follow you? You'd be leading them straight to Daniel. A valid concern, but one I'd already considered. I'll be careful. Besides, I'm not exactly a professional fugitive hunter. If I can figure out he might be at the lake house, so can they. Richard stared at the ground for a long moment, then exhaled deeply. I have a proposition. I'll take you there myself. I blinked in surprise. What? If Daniel is there, he might run if he sees you coming, but he'll talk to me. Richard leaned forward, lowering his voice further. And I need to know exactly what he told Delgado about me. There it was. Richard's true motivation, self-preservation. When? I asked. Tomorrow. I'll say I'm taking a personal day, meeting with an out-of-town client. We leave at dawn, drive straight through. I considered his offer. On one hand, having Richard along complicated things. On the other, he knew the property, had legitimate access, and was motivated to find Daniel. I'll need to tell Margaret where. I'm going, I said finally. No, Richard countered immediately. The fewer people who know, the better. She's the district attorney and my best friend. If I disappear for a day without explanation, she'll have the state police looking for me. By noon, Richard grimaced, recognizing the truth in this. Fine, but just Margaret, and make sure she knows to keep it quiet, even from her FBI contacts. At least until we've had a chance to talk to Daniel. I nodded, though I had no intention of keeping anything from Margaret's FBI contact. Richard might be playing both sides, but I wasn't. Tomorrow at dawn, I confirmed. Pick me up at Margaret's. As Richard walked away, I texted Margaret. Meeting done, got a lead. We'll brief you at your office. 20 minutes later, I was seated in Margaret's private office, recounting my conversation with Richard. He's lying, she said bluntly when I finished. Or at least not telling the whole truth. About which part? All of it. Probably. But especially about not knowing where Daniel is. Margaret leaned back in her chair. Think about it, Elle. Daniel empties your accounts, sells your house, and disappears, but he keeps in touch with his business partner? The same business partner who apparently introduced him to a drug cartel? She had a point. You think Richard knows exactly where Daniel is? I think Richard is neck-deep in whatever Daniel's involved. Margaret corrected. The Delgado connection is too convenient, and now he wants to personally escort you to a remote location outside my jurisdiction? Put that way, it did sound suspicious. But Rich has been Daniel's friend for 20 years. They built that firm together. All the more reason not to trust him, Margaret argued. When Daniel's criminal activities come to light, who stands to inherit the firm? Who absorbs all of Daniel's clients, his equity stake, his reputation in the legal community? I hadn't considered that angle. Richard had everything to gain from Daniel's downfall. provided he wasn't implicated himself. "So what do you suggest?" I asked. "If I refuse to go with him, I lose my best lead on finding Daniel." Margaret drummed her fingers on her desk thoughtfully. "Go with him, but you'll be wearing a wire." "A wire? Isn't that a bit extreme?" "These are extreme circumstances," Margaret countered. "My FBI contact can set it up discreetly. Nothing obvious, just a modified cell phone that transmits your location and audio at all times. If Richard is planning something nefarious, we'll know immediately." I considered the implications. Wearing a wire meant officially cooperating with a federal investigation, a step that would inevitably lead to Daniel's arrest if we found him. But what were my alternatives? Daniel had committed serious crimes. Even if I found him first, convinced him to turn himself in, the outcome would be the same. At least this way, I could ensure my own safety. "All right," I agreed. "Set it up." Margaret nodded approvingly. "I'll have Agent Diaz brief you this afternoon. Now, about Jake. He's insisting on coming home this weekend." I sighed. I tried to talk him out of it. "Actually, it might be better to have him here where we can keep an eye on him," Margaret mused. "My apartment has excellent security, and Michael can stay with him while we're gone." The thought of leaving Jake under armed guard while I chased his father across state lines made my stomach twist, but it was the most practical solution. "There's something else," I said, pulling out my phone. "I received these text messages an hour ago from another unknown number." Margaret took the phone, her expression darkening as she read the messages. "Consider the offer, Mrs. Bennett." 1. Missing file for a clean slate. Deadline. Monday noon. "They're getting impatient," she observed, handing the phone back, "and more explicit about their demands. What happens if we ignore the deadline?" Margaret's face was grim. "Nothing good, but finding Daniel before then might change the equation." I left Margaret's office with a plan in place: meet with Agent Diaz at 4 p.m., prepare for tomorrow's trip to Michigan, and somehow manage to act. Normally, when Jake arrived that evening, the FBI field office was housed in a nondescript government building downtown. Agent Lucia Diaz met me in a small conference room, her no-nonsense demeanor oddly reassuring in the midst of chaos. "Mrs. Bennett," she greeted me with a firm handshake. "I appreciate your cooperation. I just want to find my husband before anyone gets hurt," I replied honestly. Agent Diaz nodded, opening a slim laptop. "Let's go over what we know. Your husband, Daniel Bennett, borrowed approximately $2 million from individuals connected to the Delgado cartel. To partially repay this debt, he fraudulently sold your home and transferred the funds offshore. He's now in hiding, potentially at a property in Michigan, and the cartel is pressuring you and DHN to interfere with our ongoing prosecution of Alonso Delgado." Hearing it summarized so clinically made the situation sound even more surreal. "That's correct," I confirmed. "And you believe Richard Morrison, your husband's business partner, may be involved?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Richard introduced Daniel to these people. He must have known who they were. But whether he's helping Daniel hide or trying to save himself, that I don't know." Agent Diaz made a note. "Mr. Morrison's connections to the Delgado organization are of particular interest to us. His willingness to take you to this lake house property provides an excellent opportunity to gather intelligence." She reached into her briefcase and produced what looked like an ordinary smartphone. "This device has been modified. It appears to function normally, but it continuously transmits your location and audio to our monitoring team. The battery life is enhanced, but I recommend charging it whenever possible." I took the phone, turning it over in my hands. "Will Richard be able to tell it's not a regular phone?" "Not without specialized equipment," Agent Diaz assured me. "Keep it on your person at all times. If you're separated from it, our ability to ensure your safety is compromised." "And if we find Daniel?" Agent Diaz's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Bennett, I understand your desire to speak with your husband privately, but I need to be clear. Daniel Bennett is a person of interest in a federal investigation. If you locate him, we will move in and take him into custody. I nodded, having expected as much. What about my son? Could he be in danger? As a precaution, we've assigned surveillance to your son's dormitory at Northwestern. We've also alerted campus security to report any suspicious individuals. Once he's at DHN's residence, our agents will maintain discreet coverage. The fact that Jake already had FBI protection was both reassuring and terrifying. One more thing, Agent Diaz added, her tone grave. We have reason to believe the Delgado organization has contacts within local law enforcement. For your safety, do not discuss this operation with anyone other than DHN and the agents assigned to your case. The implication was clear. Trust no one. Not the police, not Daniel's colleagues, not even old family friends. The world had suddenly become much smaller and far more dangerous. I left the FBI office with the modified phone securely in my purse, my mind racing. Tomorrow, I would be driving across state lines with a man who might be deeply involved with a drug cartel to confront my fugitive husband who had stolen everything from me. The gravity of the situation hit me as I walked to my car. I was no longer just Eleanor Bennett, high school English teacher and wronged wife. I was now officially a confidential informant in a federal investigation, wearing a wire to gather evidence against my own husband and his business partner. My phone, my regular phone, rang as I reached the parking lot. Jake. Mom, I just got to Aunt Margaret's. Where are you? On my way, I assured him, trying to keep my voice steady. Got held up with some paperwork about the house. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Mom? Jake's voice cracked slightly. What the hell is going on? Aunt Margaret has a security guy. Here, and she won't tell me anything until you arrive. My heart ached for my son. At 19, he should be worrying about exams and dating, not criminal investigations and cartel threats. I'll explain everything when I get there, I promised. Just try to stay calm. Did Dad really sell our house? Jake asked, his voice smaller now, more like the child he'd so recently been. Yes, I answered honestly. But I'm getting it back. Everything's going to be okay. The lie felt bitter on my tongue. Nothing was okay, and I had no guarantee it ever would be again. Margaret's apartment was in an upscale building with a doorman and security cameras, a district attorney's necessary precautions. When I arrived, Jake was pacing the living room, while Michael Chen watched calmly from an armchair. Mom! Jake rushed forward, enveloping me in a hug that reminded me he was no longer the little boy who needed me to check for monsters under the bed. At 6'2", he towered over me now, his lean frame solid against mine. Hey, sweetheart, I murmured, holding him tightly. I've missed you. What's happening? He demanded, pulling back to search my face. Where's Dad? Why is there a bodyguard? Here? Margaret appeared from the kitchen, 2 glasses of wine in hand. She passed one to me with a knowing look. Elle was just about to explain everything. Over the next hour, I gave Jake a carefully edited version of events. Yes, his father had sold our house without permission. Yes, there were gambling debts involved. Yes, the authorities were looking for him. But I omitted the cartel connection, the threats, and my impending wire-wearing trip to Michigan. So Dad's just gone? Jake asked incredulously. He stole my college fund and disappeared? The raw hurt in his voice broke my heart. I'm going to find him, I promised. And I'm going to make this right. How? Jake demanded. How can you possibly make this right? Our money is gone, Mom. And even if you get the house back, how can we ever trust him again? A fair question, one I had no good answer for. I don't know, I admitted. But I have to try, for both of us. Jake slumped onto the sofa, suddenly looking exhausted. I keep trying to call him. It just goes to voicemail. He's scared, I suggested, though I wasn't sure if that was true. Was Daniel scared? Remorseful? or simply calculating his next move? He should be, Jake muttered darkly. After Jake retreated to the guest room Margaret had prepared for him, I sat with her and Michael in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones. He doesn't know about tomorrow? Michael confirmed. I shook my head. And I'd like to keep it that way. The less he knows, the safer he is. I'll stay with him, Michael assured me. No one's getting past this door. What did Diaz say about extraction? If you find Daniel? Margaret asked, ever the prosecutor thinking 3 steps ahead. Standard procedure. They'll move in, take him into custody. I stared into my wine glass. I probably won't even get to speak with him alone. Margaret placed a hand over mine. Elle, you need to prepare yourself. The Daniel you find may not be the man you married. Gambling addiction, criminal associates. He's been living a double life. The person behind that facade might be a stranger to you. I knew she was right. The Daniel who sold my house, stole our savings, and abandoned his family was not the man I thought I knew. But somewhere beneath the lies and betrayal was still Jake's father, still the man who had once been my partner. I just need answers, I said finally. Why he did it, how long it's been going on, whether any part of our life together was real. Margaret's expression was sympathetic but firm. Just remember, your safety comes first. If anything feels wrong tomorrow, anything at all, you get out of there and let the FBI handle it. I nodded, though we both knew I would do whatever it took to confront Daniel face to face. 10 years of marriage deserved at least that much. Reckoning, an accounting, a chance to look him in the eye while he explained how he could possibly justify destroying our life together. Later that night, as I prepared for bed in Margaret's spare room, I checked my go bag for the journey ahead. The FBI's modified phone, my regular phone, a change of clothes, Daniel's notebook we'd found in his office, and a small framed photo of Jake at his high. School graduation, Daniel and I flanking him, all of us smiling broadly at the camera. That family no longer existed. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever answers I found at that lake house, nothing could restore what Daniel had broken. But I could still salvage something from the wreckage, my home, my dignity, and most importantly, a future for Jake that wasn't shadowed by his father's crimes. As I finally drifted toward sleep, my phone buzzed one last time. An unknown number, again with a single message that made my blood run cold. Enjoy your trip to Michigan, Mrs. Bennett. You're not the only one looking for your husband. I stared at the screen in horror. Somehow, they knew about Richard's lake house. They knew about tomorrow's trip, which meant either my phones were compromised, Richard had betrayed me, or someone much closer to this investigation was feeding information to the Delgado cartel. I was walking into a trap. But perhaps that was exactly where I needed to be to finally get the truth. Dawn had barely broken when Richard's silver Audi pulled up outside Margaret's building. I stood in the shadows of the entryway, watching as he checked his mirrors repeatedly. Nervous. Habit or genuine caution, I couldn't tell. I'd shown the threatening text to Margaret and Agent Diaz last night. After an hour of heated discussion, we'd decided to proceed with the trip, but with enhanced precautions. 2 unmarked FBI vehicles would follow at a distance. The modified phone was fully charged in my jacket pocket, a second backup tracker sewn into the lining of my purse. Be careful, Margaret whispered, giving me a quick hug in the lobby. Remember, we have no idea whose side Richard is really on. I know, I assured her, though my racing heart suggested otherwise. I'll check in, at every stop. Michael's staying with Jake. I'll be at the office coordinating with Diaz. She squeezed my shoulder. Find Daniel, get answers, but don't take any unnecessary risks. With a final nod, I stepped outside and approached Richard's car. His face registered surprise when he saw my small overnight bag. Planning to stay a while? He asked as I slid into the passenger seat. Depends on what we find, I replied evenly. I packed for contingencies. Richard looked exhausted, dark circles prominent beneath his eyes. His normally pristine appearance was rumpled, as if he'd slept in his clothes, or not slept at all. "Did you tell anyone about this trip?" he asked, pulling away from the curb. "Just Margaret," I lied smoothly. "She thinks I need closure, whether we find Daniel or not." Richard grunted, unconvinced. "Your friend the DA isn't concerned about you. Traveling with someone she probably considers a person of interest? Should she be?" I countered. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Elle, I know how this looks, but I'm not the bad guy here. I didn't know what Daniel was mixed up in until it was too late." "Define too late," I pressed. Richard sighed heavily as we merged onto the freeway heading north. "About 6 months ago, Daniel approached me about a client, a business owner looking for discreet legal representation for a real estate acquisition. Said the referral came from an old gambling buddy of his." "Alonzo Delgado," I supplied. Richard nodded grimly. Though I didn't know that name at the time, Daniel handled everything. I just signed off as managing partner. It wasn't until later that I realized we were helping launder money through property purchases. "And you didn't report it because—" "By then, I was implicated." Richard's voice was bitter. "My signature was on documents I should have scrutinized more carefully. Daniel assured me it was a one-time thing, that he would extricate us both. Instead, he started gambling with their money, I guessed. Not at first. At first, he was just their lawyer, but Daniel has always had a weakness for cards." Richard shook his head. "When he started losing, he borrowed from them. When he couldn't repay, he offered them legal services, information about rival operations, property for money laundering, anything to keep them at bay. The Richard Morrison I'd known for a decade was meticulous, cautious, risk-averse. His story rang true, but something still felt off. "You could have gone to the authorities," I pointed out. "Cut a deal." Richard laughed humorlessly. "You think the Delgado cartel wouldn't find out if I started talking to the FBI? They have people everywhere. Police, courthouse staff, even prosecutors' offices." A chill ran through me as I thought of the modified phone in my pocket, transmitting everything to Agent Diaz. If Richard was right about cartel infiltration, "So what's your plan?" I asked, "assuming we find Daniel at the lake house." Richard was quiet for a long moment, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I want to convince him to turn himself in, negotiate a plea deal that includes witness protection. For both of us." "Both of you," I repeated flatly. "Ella, I've built that firm from nothing. Spent 20 years of my life building my reputation. Now it's all gone because I trusted Daniel." His voice cracked slightly. "The least he can do is help me salvage something from this disaster." I studied Richard's profile, trying to reconcile this desperate man with the confident attorney I'd known for years. Either he was telling the truth, or he was giving an Academy Award-worthy performance. "And what about my house?" I asked. "Our savings? Jake's college fund?" "I have no idea if any of that money can be recovered," Richard admitted. "But Daniel needs to make this right, starting with turning himself in." We lapsed into silence as the city gave way to suburbs, then to the open highway stretching northward. I sent Margaret a prearranged, all-clear text, then pretended to nap while mentally cataloging everything Richard had told me. 3 hours into the drive, we stopped at a highway rest area. While Richard used the restroom, I made a quick call to Agent Diaz from a payphone, a precaution we'd agreed upon to avoid potential monitoring of my regular cell. "We're tracking you," Diaz confirmed. "No signs of surveillance so far. Morrison's story about the firm's involvement matches what we've been able to verify independently. You believe him?" I asked, surprised. "I believe he's telling a version of the truth," Diaz clarified. "Whether it's the complete truth remains to be seen. Keep him talking." When Richard returned, he suggested switching drivers, but I declined. I'd rather keep my mind occupied watching the road, I explained. Less time to think about everything. Richard nodded in understanding and resumed driving. As we crossed into Michigan, I deliberately steered the conversation back to Daniel. When did you first notice Daniel gambling beyond his means? I asked. Richard considered the question. About 2 years ago. We were in Vegas for a legal conference. Daniel stayed at the tables until dawn 3 nights in a row. Won big the first night, lost even bigger the second. By the third night, he was chasing his losses with money I'm pretty sure he didn't have. 2 years. While I was grading papers and attending parent-teacher conferences, my husband had been spiraling into addiction and criminality. Did he ever talk about our finances? About struggling to pay bills? Richard looked uncomfortable. Once or twice. He mentioned that your teaching salary couldn't cover the lifestyle he wanted. Said the house was draining your resources with constant maintenance. My grandmother's house. The beautiful Victorian I'd lovingly restored room by room. Daniel had always been dismissive of my attachment to it, suggesting we sell and move to a newer home in a more prestigious neighborhood. He resented that house, I realized aloud. Not just because of the maintenance costs, because it was mine, because I owned it before we met. Daniel has always had pride issues, Richard acknowledged carefully. Being the man provided for by his wife's inheritance didn't sit well with him. The revelation stung, though it shouldn't have. I'd always known Daniel was ambitious, status-conscious. I just hadn't understood the depth of his resentment, or how it might have fueled his descent into gambling and theft. Did he ever mention leaving? I asked, dreading the answer. Before all this happened? Richard's hesitation told me everything before he even spoke. He consulted me about divorce options last year, he admitted finally. Just exploring, he said. Wanted to know his financial position if things ended. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Daniel had been planning to leave me, planning it while sleeping beside me each night, while celebrating holidays with our son, while I remained completely oblivious. I'm sorry, Elle, Richard added, genuine sympathy in his voice. For what it's worth, I told him he was making a mistake, that you were the best thing that ever happened to him. Apparently not, I said, my voice hollow. Not if he was willing to steal my house and disappear. The remainder of the journey passed in weighted silence, the Michigan landscape gradually, transforming from farmland to the dense forests surrounding the lake region. By mid-afternoon, Richard turned onto a gravel road that wound through towering pines. Almost there, he murmured, navigating the rutted path with practiced ease. The property is isolated, no neighbors for at least a mile in any direction, perfect for hiding, or for confrontations that no one would witness. The lake house came into view as we rounded a final bend, a rustic 2-story cabin with a wide porch overlooking a small private dock. Despite the circumstances, I could appreciate its charm. In another life, it might have been a peaceful retreat for family vacations. Richard parked beside a mud-splattered Jeep I didn't recognize. That's not Daniel's car, I noted with growing apprehension. The property management company keeps it here, for maintenance visits, Richard explained. But someone's definitely been using it recently. Look at the fresh tracks. We sat in silence for a moment, surveying the scene. No smoke rose from the chimney, no lights visible through the windows. Nothing to indicate occupancy except the Jeep and what appeared to be fresh tire marks in the muddy drive. Stay here while I check things out, Richard instructed, reaching beneath his seat to produce a small handgun. I stared at the weapon in shock. You brought a gun? After everything I've told you about the Delgado cartel, are you really surprised? Richard checked, the chamber with practiced movements. I've been carrying for months. Another piece of Richard Morrison I hadn't known existed. How many more surprises would this day bring? I'm coming with you, I insisted, reaching for my door handle. Elle, he's my husband, Rich. If he's in there, I need to see him. Richard, relented with a reluctant nod. Stay behind me. If anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. Understood? We approached the cabin cautiously. The porch steps creaked beneath our weight. Impossible to achieve any element of surprise. Richard tried the front door and found it locked. Keys under the flower pot, he murmured, retrieving a tarnished key from beneath a dusty planter. The door swung open with a protesting groan, revealing a dimly lit interior. The main room was comfortably furnished with well-worn leather sofas and a stone fireplace. A half-empty whiskey bottle sat on the coffee table beside a tumbler with dried amber residue. Someone's definitely been here, I whispered, noting the rumpled throw blanket on the sofa and ashes in the fireplace grate. Richard moved deeper into the house, gun held at his side. "Daniel," he called out. "It's Rich. Ella's with me. We just want to talk." Silence answered him. We proceeded to check the kitchen, dirty dishes in the sink, the downstairs bathroom, wet towel on the floor, and a small study, desk lamp still warm to the touch. Upstairs, Richard decided, leading the way to a narrow staircase. The upper floor consisted of 3 bedrooms and another bathroom. The master bedroom showed signs of recent occupation. Unmade bed, suitcase open in the corner, clothes draped. Over a chair. I recognized Daniel's favorite sweater, the blue cashmere I'd given him for Christmas 2 years ago. A wave of conflicting emotions crashed over me, relief that we were on the right track, anger at his betrayal, and an unexpected pang of longing for the man I thought I'd married. "He was here," I said unnecessarily, picking up the sweater. "Recently." Richard nodded, holstering his gun. "But where is he now?" A sound from outside caught our attention, the crunch of tires on gravel. We moved to the bedroom window overlooking the driveway. A black SUV had pulled in behind our car, its tinted windows, revealing nothing about its occupants. "Get down," Richard hissed, pulling me away from the window. "That's not Daniel." "How do you know?" "Daniel drives a Tesla. Always has to have the newest, flashiest thing." Richard's expression was grim. "Whoever that is, they followed us here." Panic surged through me as I thought of the threatening text I'd received. "You're not the only one looking for your husband. The cartel?" I whispered. "Or the FBI?" Richard countered, peering cautiously around the window frame. "Neither is good for us right now." 2 men emerged from the SUV, broad-shouldered figures, in dark clothing, moving with purposeful strides toward the cabin. Not law enforcement, I realized with growing dread. No badges, no announced presence. "Back door," Richard decided, pulling me toward the hallway. "There's a path through the woods to a neighboring property. If we can reach it..." A sharp crack echoed through the house, the sound of the front door being forced open. "Upstairs," a male voice commanded from below. "Check every room." Richard pulled me into the smallest bedroom, closing the door silently behind us. He pointed to a window overlooking the side yard. "Fire escape ladder in the closet," he whispered. "We need to move now." My hands shook as I retrieved the compact emergency ladder from the closet shelf. Richard secured it to the windowsill with practiced efficiency, then eased the window open without a sound. "You first," he instructed. "I'll be right behind you." Footsteps sounded in the hallway, moving methodically from room to room. We were running out of time. I swung one leg over the sill, then the other, gripping the metal rungs of the ladder, with white-knuckled determination. The ground seemed impossibly far below as I began my descent, each movement deliberate and controlled despite my racing heart. Behind me, I heard Richard begin to follow. Then came the sound of splintering wood, as the bedroom door was kicked open. "Found them!" a voice shouted. "Window!" Richard's urgent whisper reached me from above. "Run, Elle! Don't stop!" A gunshot cracked through the air. I glanced up to see Richard stumble on the ladder, one hand clutching his shoulder as dark red spread across his shirt. "Richard!" I cried out in horror. "Go!" he commanded through gritted teeth. Find Daniel! Another shot rang out, missing us both but splintering the wooden siding near my head. Self-preservation overrode all other instincts. I released the ladder and dropped the remaining distance to the ground, landing hard and rolling as Margaret's brother had taught me during a self-defense lesson years ago. Pain shot through my ankle, but adrenaline pushed it aside as I scrambled to my feet and sprinted for the tree line. Behind me, I could hear shouts and more gunfire. I didn't dare look back to see if Richard was following, focused only on putting as much distance as possible between myself and our pursuers. The forest closed around me, offering concealment but hampering speed. I ducked behind a massive oak trunk, gasping for breath, and finally risked a glance toward the cabin. Richard was being marched at gunpoint toward the black SUV, blood staining his shirt but still on his feet. No one appeared to be pursuing me into the woods, yet. They likely assumed I wouldn't get far on foot in unfamiliar terrain. They were probably right. I reached for the FBI's modified phone, praying it had survived my fall. The screen was cracked but still functional. I opened the messaging app with trembling fingers and typed a desperate SOS to Agent Diaz. Armed men at Lake House. Richard shot. Being taken. I escaped into woods north of cabin. The message showed as sent, but no confirmation appeared. Cell service was spotty at best in these remote woods. Think. The neighboring property Richard had mentioned was my best option. Civilization, help, a phone with reliable service. But which direction? The lake formed a natural boundary to the south. The driveway ran east-west. That left north, or further west. I oriented myself using the afternoon sun and set off northward, moving as quietly as possible while maintaining distance from the cabin. My ankle throbbed with each step, but I forced myself to continue, driven by the knowledge that my life likely depended on reaching safety before nightfall. After 20 minutes of careful navigation through dense underbrush, I heard the distant sound of an engine starting, the SUV, presumably with Richard inside. Had they given up searching for me, or were they simply changing tactics? Another 10 minutes brought me to a small clearing. Beyond it stood a chain-link fence with a weathered "No Trespassing" sign. The neighboring property, finally, I scaled. The fence awkwardly, wincing as my injured ankle protested, and dropped down on the other side. This property was more developed than the lake house. Paved pathways, landscaped gardens surrounding what appeared to be a much larger, more modern vacation home. As I approached the house, disappointment set in. No vehicles in the driveway, windows dark. Another seasonal property, currently unoccupied, but it would have a landline. Possibly an alarm system that, if triggered, would bring security or police. Anything was better than waiting in the woods for Delgado's men to find me. I circled the house, testing windows and doors, finally discovering a garden shed left unlocked. Inside, hanging on a pegboard, was a spare key labeled "Back Door" in faded marker. The universe had finally granted me a small favor. The key worked smoothly in the back door lock, granting me access to a modern kitchen gleaming with stainless steel appliances. I moved directly to the wall phone, lifting the receiver with desperate hope. A dial tone hummed, the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I dialed Agent Diaz's number from memory, closing my eyes in relief when she answered on the second ring. Diaz. "It's Eleanor Bennett," I said rapidly. "Men with guns at the lake house. They shot Richard and took him. I escaped into the woods. I'm at a neighboring property now. I don't know the address." "We lost your signal about 40 minutes. Ego," Diaz replied, her voice calm but urgent. "Are you injured?" "Twisted ankle. Nothing serious. Did you get my text?" "Yes. Teams are already en route. ETA 15 minutes. Can you describe the men? How many?" "Two that I saw. Large men, dark clothing. Professional, not random thugs. They knew exactly what they were doing." I swallowed hard. "They have Richard. He's wounded. Stay where you are. Diaz instructed. Secure all doors and windows. Our agents will announce themselves clearly when they arrive. Do not open the door for anyone else. Daniel wasn't at the lake house, I told her, but he had been there recently. His clothes were still in the bedroom. We'll process the scene when we secure the area, Diaz assured me. Your priority now is to stay safe until our team reaches you. After hanging up, I followed her instructions, locking doors, closing blinds, finding a makeshift weapon in the form of a heavy fireplace poker. Then I sank onto a leather sofa, the adrenaline crash, leaving me shaking and nauseated. Richard had been shot, taken. Because of me. Because I'd insisted on coming along. Because I'd been so determined to confront Daniel myself instead of letting the authorities handle it. And Daniel, where was he? Had he sensed danger and fled? The lake house before we arrived? Or had Delgado's men already found him, enacted whatever brutal punishment awaited those who stole from drug cartels? The FBI's 15 minutes stretched to 20, then 30. Outside, shadows lengthened as afternoon gave way to early evening. Every sound, the house settling, branches scratching against windows, distant wildlife calls, sent fresh jolts of fear through me. Finally, headlights swept across the drawn blinds, followed by the crunch of multiple vehicles on the gravel driveway. I tightened my grip on the fireplace poker, positioning myself away from windows, waiting. FBI! A voice called through the door. Mrs. Bennett? Agent Diaz sent us. Still, I hesitated. Show me identification through the window, I called back. A badge pressed against the side window, illuminated by flashlight. Only then did I cautiously approach the door. 4 agents in tactical gear entered first, clearing the house room by room before signaling the all clear. Agent Diaz followed, her expression softening slightly when she saw me. Are you all right? She asked, eyes quickly scanning. For injuries? I'm fine, I assured her, though fine was a relative term given the circumstances. Have you found Richard? Or any sign of Daniel? We've secured the lake house, Diaz reported. No sign of your husband, but evidence confirms he was there recently. As for Mr. Morrison, she hesitated. We found blood on the emergency ladder and driveway, but no sign of him or the vehicle you described. They took him, I repeated, guilt washing over me afresh. He was trying to help me escape. Mrs. Bennett, Diaz said carefully, based on what we heard through your wire before we lost signal, Mr. Morrison may have been more involved with the Delgado organization than he admitted. This could be internal cartel business rather than direct retaliation for your search. The implication was clear. Richard's abduction might not be my fault after all. But it did nothing to diminish the horror of watching him get shot while I escaped. We need to get you to a secure location, Diaz continued. This situation has escalated beyond our initial assessment. I'm not leaving, I insisted. Daniel could still come back to the lake house. If he does, we'll have agents watching the property, Diaz assured me. But you've been directly exposed to cartel enforcers. Your safety is our priority. And what about Richard? I challenged. Are you looking for him too? Diaz's expression remained professional but sympathetic. We're processing all available evidence and pursuing multiple leads. But Mrs. Bennett, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Mr. Morrison may not have been taken against his will. His conversation with you in the car suggested he was looking for a way out. This could be it. The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it made a certain twisted sense. Richard had been surprisingly well prepared for trouble, with his hidden gun and knowledge of escape routes. What if the arrival of Delgado's men hadn't been a surprise to him but an arranged extraction? I don't believe that, I said, though. Uncertainty crept into my voice. He was shot. Perhaps, Diaz acknowledged. Or perhaps it was staged for your benefit. We'll know more when we process the evidence. A paramedic examined my ankle, sprained but not broken, while agents photographed and documented my statement. Through it all, my mind raced with questions. If Richard had orchestrated his own abduction, what did that mean for Daniel? Were they working together? Had this entire trip been an elaborate setup? What happens now? I asked as Diaz prepared to escort me to a waiting SUV. We take you to a safe house while we continue the investigation, she explained. You'll have round-the-clock protection until we locate your husband and determine the full extent of the threat. My son is already being moved to a secure location with DHN, Diaz assured me. All necessary precautions are in place. As we drove away from the vacation home, I gazed out at the darkened forest, wondering if Daniel was out there somewhere, watching. Had he seen the FBI's arrival? Did he know I'd come looking for him? Did he even care? For the first time since discovering the eviction notice, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that the man I'd married, the father of my child, my partner of 10 years, might truly be gone. Not just physically absent, but fundamentally changed by greed, addiction, and criminal association into someone I no longer recognized. The Daniel I thought I knew would never have stolen my house, emptied our son's college fund, or disappeared, without explanation. That Daniel had never really existed. The reality I now faced was stark. My husband was a fugitive, deeply entangled with a drug cartel. His business partner had potentially staged his own abduction, and I was headed to an FBI safe house while dangerous men searched for both Daniel and me, all because Daniel Bennett couldn't admit he had a gambling problem, couldn't face his failures like a man, couldn't trust his wife to help him through difficult times. As Michigan's forests gave way to more populated areas, streetlights illuminating the gathering dusk, my shock and fear gradually crystallized into something harder, more focused. Daniel had destroyed our family, endangered our son, and left me to face the consequences alone. He'd been planning to leave me anyway, according to Richard. The gambling and theft had simply accelerated his timeline. Fine. If Daniel Bennett wanted to disappear, I would help him achieve that goal, permanently. Not by finding him, but by erasing every advantage he'd ever had. His legal career, his reputation, his freedom, his access to our son. By the time the FBI finished with him, the man who sold my house would truly have nothing left to sell, and I would be there to witness his complete and utter downfall. 3 days in an FBI safe house gave me plenty of time to think. The modest suburban ranch house outside Detroit was comfortable enough, but the constant presence of agents and the knowledge that both my son and best friend were similarly sequestered made it feel more like a prison than protection. Agent Diaz visited daily, providing updates that revealed little concrete progress. The lake house had yielded fingerprints confirming Daniel's recent presence, along with credit card receipts showing he'd visited local stores as recently as 2 days before our arrival. But the trail had gone cold. As for Richard, the situation was even more puzzling. Blood analysis confirmed it was indeed his blood on the ladder and driveway, ruling out the theory that his shooting had been entirely staged. Yet surveillance footage from a gas station 10 miles from the lake house showed Richard walking unassisted into the convenience store beside one of his apparent captors, purchasing supplies with his own credit card before returning to the SUV without any sign of duress. So he wasn't kidnapped, I concluded during Diaz's third visit. It appears more complicated than that, she replied carefully. The injury was real, but his departure with these men seems to have been at least partially voluntary. He used me, I realized aloud. The trip to the lake house, the story about wanting Daniel to turn himself in, it was all a setup. We're still determining Mr. Morrison's exact role, Diaz said. But yes, it seems he had his own agenda. I thought back to our conversation in the car. Richard's apparent desperation to find Daniel. His insistence that he'd been unwittingly drawn into the Delgado operation. All lies, most likely. But to what end? What about the threat to Margaret? I asked. The pressure to compromise the Delgado prosecution? That appears genuine, Diaz confirmed. The Delgado organization is clearly concerned about our case against Alonso. Using leverage against DA Chen would be consistent with their typical tactics. On the morning of the fourth day, everything changed. I was attempting to distract myself with a dog-eared paperback when Diaz arrived unannounced, her expression more animated than I'd seen it. "We found him," she said without preamble. "Daniel Bennett was just apprehended trying to board a flight to Buenos Aires from Chicago O'Hare." The book slipped from my fingers. "He's in custody?" Diaz nodded. "And talking, quite extensively, in fact. His attorney is already negotiating a plea deal in exchange for testimony against the Delgado organization and against Richard Morrison." "Richard?" I echoed, though after the gas station footage, I shouldn't have been surprised. According to your husband, Morrison wasn't just peripherally involved. He was the primary connection to the cartel, had been for years, long before Daniel began gambling with them. Diaz sat across from me, her expression serious. "Bennett claims Morrison used the firm to launder money for Delgado, with your husband's knowledge but under pressure from his partner." "That's convenient," I remarked bitterly. "Blame everything on the missing business partner." "We believe there's truth to his claims," Diaz countered. "Financial records show Morrison made multiple trips to Mexico City over the past 5 years, corresponding with large cash deposits to offshore accounts. Meanwhile, the gas station where we spotted Morrison after his abduction was the last confirmed sighting. His credit cards haven't been used since, and the SUV was found abandoned near the Canadian border." "He's running," I realized, "with Delgado's help, most likely. The cartel protects valuable assets." Diaz paused. "Daniel is asking to see you." Those words landed like a physical blow. After everything that had happened, the theft, the lies, the danger he'd put us in, Daniel wanted to see me. "Why would I agree to that?" I asked, my voice hardening. "He claims to have information about your house and finances that he'll only share with you directly. Says he wants to make things right." "Nothing he says can make this right," I said flatly. "I understand," Diaz replied, "but this could be your only opportunity to get answers and possibly recover some of what was taken from you." She was right. Of course. As much as I wanted to deny Daniel the satisfaction of facing me, practical considerations had to take precedence. If there was any chance of recovering Jake's college fund, of understanding exactly what had happened to our finances, I needed to hear what Daniel had to say. "When?" I asked finally. "Tomorrow morning. We'll transport you to the Federal Detention Center in Chicago." That night, I barely slept, rehearsing what I would say to the man who had shattered our life together. Should I rage at him? Remain coldly detached? Break down and demand to know why? None of these approaches seemed adequate to address the magnitude of his betrayal. By morning, I'd settled on a strategy. I would listen, gather information, show no weakness, and then use whatever I learned to ensure that Daniel Bennett lost everything that mattered to him, just as he'd tried to take everything that mattered from me. The Federal Detention Center was a stark, imposing structure of concrete and razor wire. After passing through multiple security checkpoints, I was escorted to a private interview room, a concession arranged by Agent Diaz, who waited outside to give us privacy while maintaining security. Daniel was already seated when I entered, dressed in an orange jumpsuit that made his tan skin appear sallow. He'd lost weight, his face gaunt with exhaustion and strain. The confident, charismatic attorney I'd married was nowhere to be seen in this diminished figure. "L," he said, rising halfway before the guard motioned him back into his seat. "Thank you for coming." I said nothing, taking the chair opposite, him, placing my purse carefully on the floor beside me. I'd chosen my outfit deliberately, a professional blue suit that Daniel had always admired, paired with the pearl necklace he'd given me for our 5th anniversary. A reminder of everything he'd thrown away. "You look good," he offered awkwardly when my silence stretched on. "You don't," I replied evenly. Prison doesn't suit you, Daniel. But I suppose you'll have time to adjust. He winced. I deserve that. I deserve all of it. But Elle, you have to believe me. I never meant for any of this to happen. Really? I arched an eyebrow. You accidentally forged my signature on property documents? Accidentally emptied our son's college account? Accidentally disappeared for weeks while I was served with eviction papers? It spiraled, Daniel said, his voice cracking. One bad decision led to another, and then another, until I couldn't see any way out except to run. Start from the beginning, I instructed coldly, and don't leave anything out. Over the next hour, Daniel unspooled a tale that would have seemed implausible had I not lived through its consequences. It had begun, as Richard suggested, with gambling, casual at first, then increasingly compulsive as Daniel chased the highs of his early wins. The firm was doing well, he explained. I felt entitled to some release from the pressure. Cards gave me that. The risk, the strategy, the rush when I won. But he hadn't won consistently. As losses mounted, he'd borrowed first from conventional sources, then from shadier characters introduced by Richard, who, it turned out, had his own long-standing arrangements with the Delgado organization. Rich was their attorney, Daniel admitted. Had been for years. Money laundering, real estate transactions, incorporations for shell companies. I looked the other way because the firm was benefiting financially. Then, when I needed cash, he connected me directly. And they just handed you $2 million? I asked skeptically. Daniel shook his head. It accumulated over time, 50,000 here, 100,000 there, always with the promise that I'd pay it back with interest once. Cases settled or bonuses came through, but I kept gambling, kept losing, trying to win enough to clear the debt. So you decided to sell my house, I said flatly. The one asset you knew could generate immediate cash. Shame flickered across Daniel's face. They were threatening to hurt you and Jake if I didn't pay. I panicked. The house was the only thing I could liquidate quickly without raising red flags. You forged my signature. Yes. He couldn't meet my eyes. Rich knew a notary who wouldn't ask questions. We pushed the paperwork through when the regular clerk was on vacation. And our savings? Jake's college fund? Offshore accounts, Daniel admitted. Some of it went to the Delgados as partial payment. The rest? He hesitated. I've given the account information to the FBI. There's still about 300,000 left. It's frozen now, but once the investigation confirms it's not drug money, it should be released to you. 300,000 out of what should have been over $1 million. A fraction of our life savings, of our son's future. And you expect me to be grateful? I asked incredulously. No, Daniel said quickly. I don't expect anything from you, Elle. Certainly not forgiveness. But I want you to know that I'm cooperating fully. My testimony will help the FBI dismantle a significant portion of the Delgado operation. How noble, I said, not bothering. To hide my contempt. And what do you get in return? A reduced sentence? Witness protection? Daniel nodded reluctantly. 20 years instead of life. Possibility of parole in 12 with good behavior. 12 years, I repeated. Jake will be 31 by then. You'll have missed his entire college experience. His first job. Possibly his wedding. The birth of his children. Pain etched itself across Daniel's features. I know. It's the consequence. I have to live with? No, Daniel. It's the consequence Jake has to live with. The consequence I have to live with. You're just hiding in a prison cell while we rebuild everything you destroyed. Daniel leaned forward, his expression desperate. Ella, there's something else you should know. Something about Richard. That he set you up, I interrupted. That he used me to try to find you at the lake house? The FBI has figured that part out already. It's more than that, Daniel insisted. Rich isn't just running from the cartel. or the FBI. He's running from someone even more dangerous, a rival organization that believes he's been skimming from their operations for years. And was he? Daniel nodded grimly. Millions. He has accounts all over the world under different identities. The man has been planning his escape for years, just waiting for the right moment. And you handed it to him, I observed. Your desperation gave him the perfect opportunity to disappear while focusing all attention on you. Yes, Daniel admitted. But Elle, that's why I needed to see you. If Richard realizes I'm cooperating, that I know about his offshore accounts, he might try to leverage what he knows about you, about us. What are you talking about? Daniel glanced at the observation window, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. The house sale. Rich kept documentation, proof that you knew about it, that you participated. That's a lie, I hissed. I knew nothing until I was served with eviction papers. I know that, Daniel assured me. But Rich created a paper trail suggesting otherwise. Emails that appear to be from you, phone records, even a recording of a woman who sounds remarkably like you discussing the sale. Cold dread pooled in my stomach. Why would he do that? Insurance, Daniel explained. In case everything fell apart, he wanted leverage over both of us. Make it look like we were all in it together. And you're just telling me this now? I'm telling you because the FBI is closing in on some of his accounts. If they freeze his assets before he can access them, Daniel let the implication hang. He'll use this false evidence against me, I finished. Try to drag me down with both of you. Daniel nodded solemnly. I've told the FBI everything, including Richard's fabrications. But evidence can be interpreted different ways, especially with a skilled attorney orchestrating the narrative. Our time was nearly up. A guard appeared at the door, signaling that our visit was concluding. I gathered my purse, processing everything Daniel had told me. Elle, Daniel said as I stood to leave. For what it's worth, I never stopped loving you. I just stopped deserving you. I studied the broken man before me, the brilliant attorney reduced to bargaining for years of his life, the devoted father who would miss his son's journey to adulthood, the husband who had betrayed every vow we'd made. You're right about that, I said finally. Goodbye, Daniel. Agent Diaz was waiting outside, her expression carefully neutral. Get what you needed? She asked as we walked toward the exit. Some of it, I replied. Daniel claims Richard Morrison fabricated evidence suggesting I was involved in the house sale, that I knew about it, consented to it. Diaz nodded thoughtfully. Bennett mentioned that during questioning. We're investigating, but without Morrison in custody, it's difficult to verify. If that evidence surfaces, I pressed, would I be in legal jeopardy? Potentially, Diaz admitted. But given the circumstances, your immediate report of the fraud, cooperation with authorities, prosecution would be unlikely. Still, it could complicate the recovery of your assets. Outside the detention center, I breathed deeply, processing both the information and emotions of the past hours. Daniel had confirmed my worst suspicions while adding new layers of betrayal and manipulation. Richard, the trusted family friend, had been the puppet master all along, using Daniel's gambling addiction to further his own criminal enterprises. And now I potentially faced false accusations that could derail my efforts to rebuild. What happens now? I asked Diaz as we approached the bureau vehicle. Bennett continues cooperating. We pursue Morrison. The investigation proceeds. She paused, studying me. And you try to piece your life back together. With a potential smear campaign hanging over me, I added bitterly. We'll do everything possible to distinguish legitimate evidence from Morrison's fabrications, Diaz assured me. In the meantime, you should return to the safe house until we're confident the threat has passed. But as we drove away from the detention center, a plan was already forming in my mind. If Richard Morrison had created false evidence against me, then two could play at that game. And I had something Richard didn't: the full resources of the FBI and a best friend who happened to be a district attorney. Back at the safe house, I called Margaret, who had been allowed to return to work with enhanced security after the FBI. Determined the immediate threat had diminished. "Daniel's cooperating," I told her, "but Richard apparently left behind a poison pill, fake evidence suggesting I was complicit in selling the house." Margaret's sharp intake of breath was audible, over the line. "That vindictive bastard. What's the evidence?" "Emails, phone records, possibly a voice recording. Daniel wasn't specific." "Enough to create reasonable doubt about your involvement," Margaret observed grimly. "Classic intimidation tactic." "Exactly," I agreed. "But what if we could turn it around? Use Richard's own methods against him?" Margaret was silent for a moment. "What are you suggesting, Ella?" "Richard thinks he's untouchable because he's disappeared. But money leaves trails, and he's accessing his accounts from somewhere." I paused, organizing my thoughts. "If we could make him believe his elaborate frame-up of me has been discovered and discredited, he might make a mistake," Margaret finished. "Try to create new evidence or access accounts we're monitoring." "Precisely. And when he does, the FBI can trace the activity." Margaret sounded impressed, despite her natural caution. "It's risky, but it could work. I'll talk to Diaz." Over the next week, an elaborate charade was constructed. With FBI approval, Margaret gave a carefully worded press conference announcing an expanded investigation into Bennett and Associates, including allegations that evidence in the case might have been fabricated to implicate innocent parties. Meanwhile, I was allowed to return home, my actual home, which Westlake Development had formally returned to my ownership, under discreet surveillance. The FBI's technical team carefully monitored all communication channels, watching for any attempt by Richard to access his digital trail. Jake remained at Northwestern under protection, reluctantly accepting that his spring break would be spent with security details rather than friends. He'd spoken to Daniel once by phone, a painful conversation that left my son withdrawn and angry, struggling to reconcile the father he'd admired with the criminal who'd stolen his future. "He cried," Jake reported flatly after the call. "Actually," sobbed while apologizing. "I didn't know what to say to him." "You don't have to say anything," I assured him. "Not until you're ready, if ever." "Did he really think selling our house would fix everything?" Jake asked, the bewilderment in his voice breaking my heart. "Addiction distorts thinking," I explained, remembering the shell of a man I'd faced across the detention center table. "It doesn't excuse what he did, but it helps explain the irrational decisions." On the 10th day after my meeting with Daniel, the trap was sprung. A secured email account associated with one of Richard's aliases attempted to access a server where the falsified evidence against me was supposedly stored. The access came from Toronto. Richard hadn't made it far after all. Canadian authorities, working with the FBI, traced the connection to an upscale condominium in the financial district. Within hours, Richard Morrison was in custody, extradited back to the United States to face multiple federal charges. The evidence Richard had fabricated against me was indeed extensive: doctored emails, manipulated phone records, and a voice. Recording created using sophisticated audio editing software. But with Richard in custody and Daniel's testimony corroborating my innocence, the false narrative collapsed completely. 1 month after discovering the eviction notice, I stood in my kitchen in my house, preparing tea while Margaret reviewed legal documents spread across the dining table. "It's official," she announced, holding up a court order. "All remaining assets from Daniel's offshore accounts are released to you, with no legal encumbrances. The house title is clear, and Bennett and Associates will be dissolved, with clients distributed to approved firms without connections to either Daniel or Richard." "What about Jake's college fund?" I asked, the question that had driven me since this nightmare began. Margaret smiled for the first time in weeks. "Fully restored plus interest. The judge was particularly sympathetic to that aspect of the case." I sank into a chair, relief washing over me in waves. The practical matters were resolved. Our financial security restored, our home preserved, Jake's future education funded. But the emotional wreckage remained, a landscape of betrayal and broken trust that no court order could repair. Daniel's formal sentencing is next week, Margaret reminded me gently. Will you attend? I considered the question. Daniel had fulfilled his promise to cooperate, providing evidence that helped dismantle a significant portion of the Delgado organization and led directly to Richard's capture. His plea deal was proceeding as outlined: 20 years, eligible for parole in 12 with good behavior. No, I decided finally. I've said everything I needed to say to him. Margaret nodded in understanding. And what about you? What's next? It was the question I'd been asking myself for days. The immediate crisis had passed. The danger had receded. The financial wounds were healing. But who was Eleanor Bennett now? The woman who had existed before the eviction notice, trusting, somewhat naive despite her intelligence, was gone forever. I've applied for a teaching position at Northwestern, I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke it aloud. English department starting fall semester. Jake needs support close by, but not hovering. And I need a fresh start. You're selling the house? Margaret asked, surprised. I shook my head, running my hand along the lovingly restored wainscoting of the dining room. No, this is still my home. But I'll rent it out during the academic year, come back for summers and holidays. It's time to build something new while preserving what matters from the past. Later that evening, after Margaret had gone, I wandered through the rooms of my grandmother's house, my house, touching familiar surfaces, remembering the history embedded in these walls. So much had changed in a single month. My marriage was over. My husband would spend more than a decade in prison. My son was struggling to process a betrayal that had shaken his foundation. But we had survived. More than survived. We had fought. Back against those who tried to take everything from us. And we had won. Daniel had gambled away his freedom, his family, his future. Richard had manipulated and schemed his way into a cell adjacent to his former partner. Both men had lost everything that mattered: their prestigious careers, their sterling reputations, their place in society, their freedom. And I had emerged stronger, wiser, more determined than ever to build a life on my own terms. The woman, who had once defined herself primarily as Daniel Bennett's wife, now stood firmly as Eleanor Caldwell Bennett, formidable in her own right. In my study, I opened my laptop and began composing an email to the Dean of Humanities at Northwestern, accepting the position they'd offered. New beginnings required decisive action. As I typed, I glanced at the framed family photo still sitting on my desk. Daniel, Jake, and me at Jake's high school graduation, all smiles and optimism for the future. After a moment's contemplation, I gently placed the frame in my desk drawer. Not discarded, but no longer defining my present view. The husband who secretly sold my house had indeed lost everything. And in ensuring his downfall, I had rediscovered something I'd gradually surrendered during 10 years of marriage: my own power, my own voice, my own path forward. The house remained mine. The future, with all its uncertainty and promise, belonged to me as well. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.